4, 3, 2, 1.
This week on SF UK, sex machines. From the glamorous, gleaming rockets of Gerry Anderson's Thunderbirds to the dirty, devastating technology of Ridley Scott's Blade Runner and Alien. But first, frottage in the fast lane with J.G. Ballard's Crash.
The volumes of Helen's thighs pressing against my hips, her left fist buried in my shoulder, her mouth grasping at my own, were each overlaid by the inventories of a benevolent technology. The moulded binnacle of the instrument dials, the jutting carapace of the steering column shroud, the extravagant pistol grip of the handbrake. Her hand pressed against my right testicle. The plastic laminates around me, the colour of washed anthracite, with the same tones as her pubic hairs, parted at the vestibule of her vulva. The passenger compartment enclosed us like a machine, generating from our sexual act a homunculus of semen, blood, and engine coolant.
British science fiction went extreme with J.G. Ballard's Crash. It's a sick love letter to technology.
Crash is a nightmarish vision of the future, in which people become aroused by a collision of sex, death, celebrity, and cars.
Crash was published in 1973, but only just. It was so shocking that its own publisher kept it locked in a drawer.
James Bond is quite cars as penis extensions, I suppose.
Oh yeah, baby. Oh yeah, you're the best I've ever had.
Crash is exploring the dark side of that, exploring actually what's really going on with people's minds when they think of machinery in a very sexual way.
God, I love you. Oh, Christ.
Man creates machine, man relates with machine, you know, where does this lead? People just cannot relate to each other anymore. Sexual relations become completely broken down. The only way that people can get sexual gratification is through machinery, through technology.
God, I hope you call me in the morning.
The characters in Crash have perversions that include sexually penetrating the injuries sustained in car crashes.
She was in a terrible crash and got her legs cut off, and then she likes to get people to have sex with her stump, I think. Just weird mechanical fetishes.
There is something so sexy about cars crashing. Those slow motion test footage is always very seductive to watch. Bodies shunting together and spurting oil. It's a reminder of mortality, which sex is on very many levels, particularly as you get old. And that's the other thing about science fiction, it's that fear of technology and hatred of technology.
Crash celebrates the sexual potential of machines, the erotic allure of a well-buffed chassis.
Supercar! Supercar!
A far more wholesome bond between man and car was celebrated in the early TV show from British puppet master and sci-fi pioneer Gerry Anderson. Its title, Supercar.
Supercar! Supercar!
Gerry Anderson's puppet TV shows were so enamoured with machines that they were named after them. From Supercar to Fireball XL5, from Stingray to Thunderbirds, the car, or the spaceship, was the star.
Supercar! Supercar!
I'm just going to go and see Gerry Anderson in his office down at the end of the garden, so pop along. Of course, you do realise that this whole pool slides back about 20 feet and then a giant rock in emerges.
The sort of idea of making a science fiction action-adventure series starring puppets is crazy in the extreme, but that's what I was faced with. one thing we not only couldn't get them to do, but knew that we would never be able to get them to do, was to walk. So I came up with the idea of supercar, because we could put the puppets into this supercar and they would seemingly be rushing around all over the place when in fact they weren't even moving. We made the car so that it would fly, go along the road, land on the sea and go under the sea to make it more interesting.
Supercar! Supercar!
Gerry Anderson was clearly wrapped up in the Harold Wilson white heat of technology moment of Britain.
Once again, one sees this extraordinary curve of the wing.
Technology was going to be the way by which Britain regained its pride from the lost empire.
She really is a very beautiful aircraft.
All of Gerry Anderson's shows exhibit a massive love affair with technology.
Gerry Anderson's cars were so cool that they were made into desirable little dinky toys, which I used to play with as a kid, joyously crashing them together in an innocent way, and not in a depraved J.G. Ballard kind of way.
Oh, relax. What can go wrong?
In the world of Gerry Anderson, we love cars as much as rockets and aeroplanes. Cars go very fast. They sometimes crash. Cars are just it. Lady Penelope's pink Rolls-Royce Fab 1 is one of the other key vehicles in Thunderbirds. It's got 6 wheels, plexiglass dome on the top, and more importantly, there's machine guns and various other gizmos to help in the espionage and rescue work.
Beg pardon, milady, but the drink was drugged.
Oh dear, how tiresome. It looks such a pretty Pernod too.
Penelope and Parker were a great team.
Where do you desire to go when we get there?
The Café Etalon, Parker. I'm meeting Sir Jeremy Hodge there at midnight.
Penelope had her country mansion, so she was aristocracy, albeit that she was going rote and was relying on coach parties to visit, and she had a Cockney chauffeur, which was a great contrast. But the fact that they were great friends and they got on well together and operated as a team, I suppose was the early movement of the upper crust and the lower crust beginning to mesh and work together.
Secretly in Europe.
So he's one of us then, milady?
Yes, Parker. He's one of us.
There are some people that have read in sexual significance into the pink Rolls-Royce and relationship between Penelope and Parker. I think it's probably a fairly innocent one, or at least as innocent as any oversized pink Rolls-Royce with machine guns in it can be.
Not Parker. He wasn't very sexy, was he?
Is it possible to be aroused by car crashes? Do you get hard at the thought of sex, death, and technology?
Sex and cars go together in the mind of any teenager. They fantasize about fiddling around in the back seat. Any sexual associations we make with cars are magnified on the much grander scale of rockets and spaceships.
Stand by for liftoff.
You could almost fancy Gerry Anderson's machines, his eye for sexy design, and his special effects cottage industry made in the British Disney. His shows took science fiction ideas into the mainstream.
There's a lot of sexual subtext going on in Thunderbirds with those incredible craft. Thunderbirds 1 and 3 are obviously the phallic presence.
1.
Thunderbird 2, on the other hand, is the maternal, is the mother. It has a warm pod inside which it drops, and interesting and useful things come out of it. It's nice and curvy. Thunderbirds all over is rocket porn, in the nicest possible way. And thinking about the time in Thunderbirds when Alan Tracy is showing a little boy his Thunderbird 3 rocket, and this loving shot from the bottom with really romantic string music accompanying it. We're to worship at the feet of Thunderbird 3.
Gosh, Thunderbird 3. It's enormous.
British science fiction has a schizophrenic attitude to technology. Shows like Gerry Anderson's Thunderbirds worship those itty little bitty spaceships which come out of the tradition of oddball inventors knocking up things in their garden sheds, like, you know, Concorde or the Dyson vacuum cleaner. But most of the disasters that international rescue set out to avert in Thunderbirds are caused by machines going wrong or technology breaking down.
The typical plot of Thunderbirds is the sort of typical central plot of most science fiction. It's about man biting off more than he can chew.
What in thunder was that? She's not gonna make it. She's not gonna make it. We're not gonna make it, Bill. We're not gonna make it.
Men think that they're great and can solve anything through technology and they're great parrots, so they build this fantastic machine which will do anything. But of course it goes wrong, it falls down a hole. Stuck hanging off a cliff. So it's always, no, don't overreach yourself. Technology will lead to disaster. But of course in Thunderbirds it's technology that saves them. They come in with their Thunderbirds.
Next up, Gerry Anderson sacks his puppets and hires real actors for Space 1999 and UFO, while the sex machines turn murderous in Alien and Blade Runner.
Anything can happen in the next half hour.
Gerry Anderson tired of his puppets and headed off to the moon for his most ambitious shows yet, UFO and Space 1999. I loved them as a kid and craved a quilted, crimpoline jumpsuit all of my own. Gerry was still optimistic that man's future lay in lunar exploration. The colony, Moonbase Alpha, was his utopian dream at the cutting edge of 70s interior design. But as ever with Gerry's shows, where gleaming technologies went, disaster was never far behind. There is an atomic explosion on the moon, and it is blown out of Earth's orbit and becomes lost in space.
The whole premise of Space 1999 is based on a technological dream, this moon base, which has gone horribly wrong. Technology has let them down, and they're set adrift endlessly in the cosmos.
UFO and Space 1999 share the same vision of the future, a 70s bachelor pad of moodily lit moulded plastic, a gleaming utopia that recalls 2001: A Space Odyssey, but on a lower budget.
Your code is correct.
Everything feels really quite pristine, which actually only serves to reinforce the desperation and anxiety of the members of Moonbase Alpha. In virtually every episode of Space 1999, you will see a grown man screaming hysterically. There's madness, there's despair, there's outright hysteria going on. This is Gerry Anderson wanting to be adult, but of course to the little boys and girls watching Space 1999 at 11 o'clock on a Saturday morning, it was really quite disturbing stuff.
Gerry Anderson's shows may have been aimed at teenagers, but he always threw in something for the dads. In UFO, men and women work side by side in a glorious, utopian vision of sexual equality.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
In the 60s, it was very unusual for women to go out to work. And it was even more unusual for them to have key jobs. And very often, women at that time, if they were director of a company, you know, they would perhaps have a face like the back of a bus, you know.
You're new here, aren't you?
Uh-huh.
You must have passed all the tests.
All of them.
I bet.
I was trying to say, look, this is how things are going to be in the future. No, they won't wear horn rim spectacles. They will be glamorous, good-looking, highly intelligent girls doing a great, great job.
Red alert. UFO 428. 146 green.
Got it. 428, 146 green. Speed. Solid. Trajectory termination. Coming up.
A grittier, perhaps more realistic working woman in space came after UFO, with the character of Ripley in British director Ridley Scott's film Alien.
Early sci-fi had pioneering heroes, but by the time you get to films like Alien, the people are much less certain about what they're doing in the future. That's what's great about Ripley. She's a true heroine, but you can see her trying to work out every step of the way, my God, what is the best thing to do now? What are the rules? I'm responsible for my team, I'm responsible for this, I'm responsible for that. How do I negotiate these things? So she's a real person making real decisions. The alien, which is a female monster, which is so scary that in order to try and fight this, you know, monstrous feminine thing, you have an ultimate woman, like a woman in all sense of the world. She's not babe, she's a woman.
By the 80s, technology had been around for a while. And it was at this time the British director Ridley Scott found himself in the washroom of a jumbo jet. He looked around himself and he realised the future wasn't going to be all pristine and white, it was going to be all beaten up. So was born the idea of dirty technology, which is to feature so prominently in his two classic science fiction films, Alien and Blade Runner.
If UFO and Moonbase Alpha are utopian officers, the future of white-collar work, then the Nostromo, the spaceship in Alien, is strictly blue-collar. It's a dirty, dystopian dump truck.
So in Ridley Scott's Alien, we get a spaceship which is as far removed from the pristine Moonbase Alpha as could possibly be imagined. It's dirty, it's cramped, it's grimy, it's noisy, and there are loads and loads of ducts for extremely unpleasant aliens to hide in.
Alien is dark and it's dirty and the things on the ship don't work and the people don't get along. It's the flip side of all the hopes and expectations of what the world could be like, to say this is kind of the direst possibility in a way of what we could end up being like.
After Alien, Ridley Scott created the most influential dystopia of the 80s, the rain-sodden city of Blade Runner.
If we have a machine in Britain, sooner or later, it's going to go wrong. We're quite cynical about the uses and possibilities of technology. And so when a British director like Ridley Scott goes to America and does a science fiction film, we end up with something like Blade Runner, a very, very dystopian view of the possibilities of technology. Technology goes wrong, society goes wrong, everything goes wrong.
One of the key things, obviously, about Blade Runner is the visual sense, the way in which it has these big, science fictional, in the old-fashioned sense, big gleaming buildings with tons and tons of lights on them. but then almost like panning down from there towards a more gritty urban street environment which looks recognizably like it is today.
The dirty technology of Blade Runner is very British. This vision of the city skyline is inspired by the ICI plant in Redcar, near where Ridley Scott grew up.
The city, for me, conjures up somewhere in between Croydon on a rainy day and Tokyo of the future. It is a very British kind of view of the future. It's smoky, it's rainy, it's wet, it's grimy. It's quite a lot like the London of the Winter of Discontent of 1979 as well. There's loads of rubbish piled up everywhere and people squatting. But the posh people live up high and don't ever have to see any of this stuff.
The most terrifying dystopian idea of Blade Runner comes straight from the speed-addled mind of its original creator, Philip K. Dick. It's that, in the future, there'll be no difference between us and machines.
The robots, which you would think would be the most science-fictional element of it, aren't shining bits of metal. They look exactly like humans. In fact, the whole point of the film is the fact that the robots are indistinguishable from humans, which is, again, one of the first and certainly most seminal times where you start to see this blurring of the distinction between what is human and what is machine.
And where does this technological perfection get us? It gets us into psychosis of the android. They become violent, unpredictable, and extremely scary.
We are scared by technology, and we're turned on by it.
This is the voice of the Mr. Hans.
British science fiction has always played to our fear and our desire for the sex machine.
It is
even if that desire is just a crush on Lady Penelope.
Yes, Parker.
Next week, we take a trip with Doctor Who and score a hit of 60s psychedelic sci-fi with Sean Connery in a red nappy.